Wow, what a statement made by Ilia Topuria, knocking out that legendary chin of Max Holloway's in round 3 at UFC 308. Yes guys, welcome back to Fight Energy. In today's video we're doing 5 things we learned from Ilia Topuria against Max Holloway. If you've not seen this series before, we put up these 5 boxes, and as we go through the video, we reveal one box at a time of something we learned from this fight. Sounds simple enough. But before we get into it, let's take a look at the fight itself. In the pre-fight build-up, when we were discussing what's at stake for both fighters, I actually said that legacy was at stake for both Max Holloway and Ilia Topuria. And that does sound bizarre because it's Ilia Topuria's first title defense. How often can you talk about legacy this early in someone's career? However, for him to have back-to-back victories against Alexander Volkanovski and then Max Holloway if he'd won this fight, then you had to say he's beginning a legendary run, and he was starting his own legacy. And that turned out to be the case. We're going to take a look at the fight as a whole. So I actually think Holloway started really well. The first 2 rounds kind of followed a similar pattern. Topuria would start well, loads of nice calf kicks. If you saw my pre-fight prediction video, I made quite the rogue claim that Topuria might finish Holloway with calf kicks, and I did actually give this prediction with some good reasoning. If you saw the face-off at the start of the fight, it would make sense to you, and also if you saw Holloway's 3 fights against Volkanovski. Because Topuria is the shorter fighter, Holloway had to bend his legs slightly. By bending your legs, you're putting more weight through your legs, making your feet slower at getting in and out. It's harder to check kicks. So I knew how dangerous Topuria's calf kicks were, and that Holloway's leg would be there to be kicked time and time again. And we saw this to be the case in the first 2 rounds. And then we look at the finish itself. Whilst I try and not be too personality based on this YouTube channel, I'm not really interested in the gossip that goes on behind the scenes. I know there are great channels that do cover that stuff, but I'm just not interested in that. I prefer looking at the fights objectively, looking at stylistic matchups when I make predictions and things like that. But you just can't help rooting for Max Holloway from both a personality perspective and a fighting style. And to see the legendary chin finally get cracked, it was rough to see. Ilia Topuria, all credit to him, he put together an elite game plan and he executed it perfectly. Like we said before, it wasn't perfect. He ate shots. This is a high level, world class level, elite level mixed martial arts fight where there is going to be back and forth. But Topuria stuck to his game plan, executed it perfectly, and he is probably pound for pound the most dangerous fighter on the planet. I know that recency bias is a thing and there's so many excellent fighters in the UFC currently. It's just really difficult to think of a stylistic matchup that would cause problems to Ilia Topuria, and that's one of the biggest compliments you can give a fighter. But anyway, let's get into the 5 things we've learned, and the first thing that we learned is the patience and the patient game plan of Ilia Topuria. You might have heard at the end of the fight Paul Felder, who was commentating, saying of Ilia Topuria, it took him some time to find his range. But this shouldn't be seen as a criticism, because taking your time and finding your range, it's all integral to Ilia Topuria's game plan. Ilia Topuria is a power puncher. I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. He throws with so much power, he puts his full body into the shots, and that does require being patient, taking your time. You can't just throw with power from the first bell without having your timing. There's nothing more tiring than swinging big and missing, and Ilia Topuria would just gas himself out within 30 seconds, within a minute into the fight. He knows, he's intelligent to recognise. He needs to know where his distance is, get the timing of his opponent, and then he can unleash the bombs. I compare him in boxing to someone like Gervonta Davis. Now, Gervonta Davis is an extreme example. His output is a lot lower than Ilia Topuria's, but the point still stands. He takes his time. He waits till he sees any habits that his opponents makes, ways in which he can close the distance, and then when he gets their timing, when he gets their distance, he'll unleash the bombs. It's no surprise that in Topuria's recent fights, going back the last couple of years, he's not been getting these round 1 KOs, even though he's got the power to. Jai Herbert, Volkanovski, who's Bryce Mitchell, now Max Holloway. It's all taken him a couple of rounds to get to his opponent, and that's all calculated. He knows, he's very much aware, like we all are, of how much power he possesses. But there's no point throwing these shots if he's going to swing and wildly miss and tire himself out. He knows that he can be patient, he knows he's durable, he's got a good chin, so he just needs to work his way into a fight, download the opponent's information like we said previously of fighters like Lomachenko, of Peter Yan in MMA, and then he can get his shots off. Then he can get all the devastating finishes that we've seen before. Patience and getting timing, getting distance underpins everything else in his game. We are going to be looking at other elements of his fighting style later on in this video, but here I really want to talk about his boxing and his boxing IQ, the way that he cuts off the cage. All these things contribute to him being able to get off his power shots. We saw in the Dan Ige fight against Lerone Murphy that was earlier on in the same evening that Dan Ige was almost chasing Lerone Murphy around the octagon at times, but Ilia Topuria doesn't do this. He knows that, again, this is a waste of valuable resources in terms of energy. He cuts off, he goes for nice side steps to stop Holloway constantly circling. He took blitzes as well, which he needs to do against the taller fighter, but all his blitzes were really calculated because he knows how dangerous Max Holloway is. Everyone knows how dangerous Max Holloway can be, and he was having success with his jab. But Topuria kept the blitzes coming, his boxing IQ was on another level, and it really begs the question of what style could possibly beat this version of Ilia Topuria. My thinking is you either need to come out with a slightly different style each round to completely throw his timing off, throw out his distance, or get him out of there early, which is much, much easier said than done with such a good fighter like Ilia Topuria. But yeah, the first thing we learnt is the patience of Ilia Topuria. He's such an elite fighter. He's so patient. He gets his timing down before he unleashes his best shots. He still throws good shots in the first round when he gets the timing, but he's in no rush to get his opponent out of there. He knows that he's going to get the timing, going to get the distance, and as you've seen in all his recent fights, excluding Josh Emmett, he can get his opponent out of there, be it via submission or more recently knockout. So let's move on to the second thing that we learnt in this fight, and it is that Max Holloway's time at featherweight is over. I just don't really see a viable path back to a title shot for him. Look, he does have the BMF belt and he's such a superstar that he will have a lot more options than other fighters will. But the point still stands that he's lost 4 title shots in recent years now, and you do get the feeling that the division has moved on. Couple that with the fact that Holloway's legendary chin has finally been cracked. We all know how that story goes. Someone who relies so much on having a good chin, has the most strikes absorbed in the UFC. It normally doesn't end well. And again, it pains me so much to say this because I've been such a fan for so many years. He does so many things so well. In this fight, it was so competitive until it wasn't. He was doing really nice work with the oblique kick. He was mixing up the boxing well. But I just think his time at featherweight's over. But saying that he does have options, that means that he can move up to lightweight. He can have these superstar fights. There's always a potential Conor McGregor rematch if he does come back to the sport. Max Holloway has, rightly so, put himself right up there with the UFC stardom. He's got so many options, but I just don't think another featherweight title run is one of the options. But I don't want to give the impression that this fight was one-sided. Far from it. Max looked great. Like we said before, his jab was working really nicely. When he gets his jab going, it's one of the best in the sport. But he does get hit so often. Also, I do want to mention his post-fight speech, his post-fight reaction. Max Holloway is one of the best losers in the sport. The first thing he said was, "No excuses, I lost to the better man tonight." How can you not love Max Holloway? Everything he stands for in the sport, exciting matchups, great personality, humble in victory, humble in defeat. Just a fantastic guy, fantastic fighter. I'd love to see him make a real push at lightweight. We've seen that he does have power in lightweight. He stopped Justin Gaethje. And I think there are names in that top 10 that he could beat. He could make a real push to the title. Look, Islam Makhachev's going to be a problem for anyone. We saw Holloway getting taken down very easily in the first round of this fight. So I'm by no means suggesting that he could beat Makhachev. But anyway, I'd like to see him move up a weight class, have a real crack at the lightweight title. But I think it's fair to say that the second thing we learned is that Max Holloway's time at featherweight is over. Moving on, the third thing that we learnt is that Ilia Topuria is a complete mixed martial artist. He's an example of this next generation of mixed martial artists coming through, and it was his demonstration of having a complete game that led to the finish in this fight. There's 2 specific things that I do want to pick out. It's his takedown of Max Holloway in the first round and his calf kicks. I was so close. I feel like I was so close to getting the calf kick KO prediction correct. Holloway was really struggling with his legs. You can tell his movement became really awkward. Topuria knew that the calf kick would be on, and he attacked it early. Holloway was doing some really nice lateral movement early on, getting his boxing combinations away and slipping off, circling round, and Topuria needed to stop this. For someone who is a power puncher, you need to stop your opponent's movement as quickly as possible, because lateral movement means that he can circle away from his power punches. So even though Max started to counter the calf kick, Topuria persisted with it, and as you saw, it paid off. Holloway's lateral movement really slowed down and he started backing up in straight lines. This is really, really important. Couple this with the fact that Topuria landed that early takedown. This gave Max Holloway a whole nother dimension of the fight to think about. Holloway would be able to stand up tall at range and avoid taking the worst of those calf kicks. But by standing tall, you leave yourself more vulnerable to the takedowns. So Holloway had to lower his base, not only to be in range for the strikes, but also to try and defend takedowns. And this is just another example of how good Topuria's game plan was. He knew that he needed to slow down the feet of Max Holloway, to get him to put more weight through his feet by getting him to bend his legs. So by threatening the takedown early on, and by continuing with the calf kick, he was able to both compromise his movement and ensure that he moved back in straight lines. And that's exactly what happened with the finish. He was able to blitz forward, land a huge left hook. Look, if Alex Pereira didn't exist, I think hands down, Ilia Topuria would have the best left hook in the UFC. I think he can still make a case for it. It's more textbook technically. He keeps his shoulder high. It doesn't come from so low. Okay, it doesn't have the power of Alex Pereira, who is now 4 weight classes above Topuria, but it's such an effective weapon and it puts everyone down. You've never seen that happen to Max Holloway ever, and Ilia Topuria was able to do it. He chopped at the calf, he threatened the takedown early. That really compromised Holloway's movement, meant that he moved back in straight lines rather than circling off, and he was able to get the finish. It's just such an example of high-level mixed martial arts, putting together an excellent game plan and executing it. Despite having moments where it wasn't all going his way, Holloway was countering the calf kick. He was getting the jab off. The jab was causing some damage, but Topuria knew that he had to stick to the game plan. He needed to come through the fire. He needed to get his weapons off. He did all this. I'm so impressed with Topuria. He is a complete mixed martial artist, and that is the third thing that we learned. If there was any doubt of it beforehand, we can put that all to bed. Guys, I hope you're enjoying this video. Before we move on to the fourth thing and the fifth thing that we've learned from this fight, please do subscribe and drop a like on this video. The fourth thing that we learned is a little bit different. It's not so technical, but it's more of an overall point for the UFC where we are at the moment. Now, the sport has come under a lot of criticism recently for the wrestling heavy approach of certain fighters. A lot of fighters with the title do favour wrestling in their game and are maybe not so effective at getting their opponents out of there or finishing a fight. I really want Ilia Topuria to be a bona fide example of what it takes to be a superstar in the UFC in 2024. We'll start with the fighting style. It's so exciting. He mixes stuff up well. No one was complaining when he got the takedown because people knew that he wasn't just going to try and hold Max Holloway down. Firstly, he couldn't hold Max Holloway down because Holloway is so excellent at getting back up onto his feet. We've seen that in over 10 years of examples from Max Holloway's career. But if he was able to hold Max Holloway down, we know that there'd be submission attempts. We know there'd be ground and pound. He wouldn't just be holding on, going for control time. That's not his game. And whilst it might not be the safest path to victory, it is the most exciting. The fans appreciate it. And it is what this sport should be about. I'm all for referee intervention if it does get the fight going, if it makes it more exciting, if it means that there's more action happening. You look in Muay Thai fights, when fighters are standing just outside of range, the referee will literally go there and say, come on, fight, let's get going. Just see any one championship fight for an example of that. But Ilia Topuria does it all. He's so exciting. And even if we just park his exciting fighting style to one side and talk about his personality through this build-up, he knew in the build-up to this fight that he was going to be the heel. He was going to be the villain. Max Holloway's such a fan favourite, as we've mentioned so many times in this video before. Topuria knew that he had to be the villain, and he was more than welcome to really get into the role, making claims at the head-to-head that Holloway has no technique, no power, making claims that he was going to be the first 3-weight world champion, even the pointing to the canvas at the start of the fight, as he promised he would do, where they just go and swing for the first 10 seconds. All of this helped build a fight that didn't need any help building. But Topuria is an example of what you need to do to be a superstar in the UFC in 2024. He combines the personality side of it with the exciting fight style. So many fighters can learn from this, should learn from this. Heavy wrestlers should know that, hey, just by adding a bit more ground and pound, a bit more action when we're there, we could make this game all the more exciting. Referees take note. If they're not doing what fighters like Topuria are doing, like Renato Moicano did against Benoit Saint-Denis the other week. They really need to be pushing the action. If we want this sport to continue to grow at the level it is growing, you need superstars. Ilia Topuria, through both his fighting style and personality, has solidified himself as a true superstar this year. I also want to make the case of Topuria being the fighter of the year. Look, I love Alex Pereira for all the same reasons. He's such an exciting fighter. Despite speaking no English, he knows how to build a fight. His ring walk is just epic. But I just think based on the level of opposition, beating two all-time greats back-to-back, I think you have to give it to Topuria. So in this fight, point number 4, we learnt 3 or 4. Point number 4, we learnt that Ilia Topuria is a bona fide superstar, and he's also paving the way for other fighters. Take a look at what this man's doing. Try your best to replicate it in your own way, and you can be a superstar in this sport. And finally, the 5th thing that we learnt in this fight is that it does appear that Alexander Volkanovski is next in line for the title shot. I personally don't like this fight. I don't like it next. I'm not making the case that Volkanovski's over the hill. I do agree that he came back too soon to both fight Islam Makhachev and fight Ilia Topuria after coming off such a brutal knockout. But I just think that we need to move the division on slightly. I like the potential Diego Lopez fight. I like the winner between Aljamain Sterling and Evloev. But I just think the division needs to move on. I'm not saying that this fight won't ever happen, this rematch. I think the octagon at the end of the fight was really respectful. I really liked the point that Topuria made as well, that Volk had 7 title fights or title defenses. I can't remember which one. But this fight could definitely happen down the line, but the division needs to move on. I'm not a big fan of fighters waiting out for rematches and things like that in general, but it would appear as though Alexander Volkanovski is next. Let me know what you think about it. I'm not too keen on seeing that next. I'd like to see Volkanovski getting 1 or 2 wins in the meantime. But yeah, let me know what you think about that one. So let's recap the 5 things that we learnt, and then we'll have a brief word on the co-main event because I think it's worth mentioning. So firstly, the first thing that we learnt is that patience is key, and patience is key to Ilia Topuria's game plan. The second thing that we learnt is that Max Holloway's time at featherweight is over. The chin's now been cracked, 4 title losses in just a few years. He needs to move up a weight class and make a real run at the lightweight title. The third thing that we learnt is that Ilia Topuria is that next generation complete mixed martial artist. His game plan involved legs, it involved punches, it involved takedowns. Everything he did was just aiming towards that finish. And the fact that he was able to put it all together, come through some fire, is just a demonstration of elite mixed martial arts. The fourth thing that we learnt is that Topuria is a bona fide superstar. And he's provided the recipe of what it takes to get there. Exciting fights, being prepared to sell a fight, build it up, be the villain if you have to be. Putting all these things together will make you a superstar in the UFC in 2024. And finally, the 5th thing that we learnt is that Alexander Volkanovski seems to be next in line for the title shot. Again, I'm not too keen on that fight, but based on what we saw in the octagon afterwards, it does seem to be next. Now let's quickly talk about Khamzat versus Robert Whittaker. What an unbelievable performance by Khamzat. One thing that I do want to pick out is just how explosive, just how fast his low double leg is. No one seems to be able to have an answer for it. He's able to shoot so quickly, he drives them back to the fence, and once he's on top of you, even an elite scrambler like Robert Whittaker is unable to shake him off. Fantastic performance by Khamzat. I do think it was the elbow that did the damage to the jaw before he sunk the choke in or the face crank in. I think the damage was already done. And then Robert Whittaker was probably feeling all kinds of weird things happening to his face, hence the quick tap. But yeah, unbelievable performance, dominating performance. It couldn't have been more dominating by Khamzat Chimaev. And I think after Strickland Dricus, he has to be next in line. But anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. We do this after every big UFC fight. 5 things that we've learnt. We've got a busy content week next week. I'll be releasing the vlog, the Saudi Arabia vlog, where I went to see Francis Ngannou against Renan Ferreira, so that'll be coming, and I probably will do a full card reaction as well.